Okay, so now we're going to talk about the decision to lend or save or invest, right? So it's so important to remember that whenever someone is borrowing, someone else is lending, right? This is going to be particularly important when we think about things like a country's debt, because at least when we look at sort of the world, all of our debt is just owed to ourselves, right? And from a microeconomic point of view, debt is something that needs to be paid back. If I have a mortgage or a car loan or a student loan, I'm going to have to pay that debt back. And if I don't pay that debt back, there's going to be some negative repercussions. From a macroeconomic point of view, debt is just something we owe to ourselves. It's allowing some people to consume more today, whether that's a person or a company or a government, and it's allowing some people to consume more tomorrow. And so when we think about this, let's just talk about two people, right? So we had Julia before, who was the borrower. She's getting $100 in the future, later. Marco has $100 now, and he might want to move some of that $100 into the future. And then the question is, well, how does Marco go about doing that? So there are a number of options, right? So if we think about $100, we could think, all right, well, he could put it under his mattress, but there's a danger that he might lose some of it, right? Or if we were thinking about, a farmer, he could store some of his food, but some of it might go rotten, right? And so storing comes with a certain amount of risk. So we're going to assume that if you store your endowment, whatever it is, whether it's food or cash or whatever it is, there's a chance of losing 20% of it. We'll just assume it's a certainty of losing 20% of it. So you only can consume a maximum of $80 in the future if you store it now. So in that case, Marco's going to consume at some point here where his marginal rate of substitution is equal to the marginal rate of transformation, where he's consuming more now and less in the future because he loses some of that money by storing it. So he's there at point H, where he's consuming 68 now and 26 later. The other option is that Marco decides to lend the money at 10% interest. And so in that case, if that loan is safe, and that's going to be something that we kind of keep in the background, that idea of risk right now, then he could consume up to 110, assuming that the interest rate is 10%, right? Marco would lend $100 maybe to Julia, and Julia would pay back the $110 in the future. And so now his feasible frontier has shifted up. Now he's able to consume at a higher place, right, where his marginal rate of substitution is equal to the marginal rate of transformation. And in this case, he consumes 65 now and 39 in the future. So there is another option, right? So we could invest. He could say, all right, well, I have this idea for a business which could be really successful, in which case I would get a 50% return. And so now he's choosing between 100 now and 150 in the future, right? And in that case, right, the slope now is 1.5, and he's able to consume at an even higher place. He puts 40 into his business, but that returns 50%, so he's able to consume 60 in the future and 60 now. And so that's his highest level of utility. And so the choices then for Marco in this case are storage, in which case he loses some, lend, in which case he gets a little bit extra, and invest, in which case he gets a lot extra. Now keep in mind that these all come with different levels of risk, and that's something that we're ignoring for right now. So if he does invest in this high return product, you would think, all right, well, gosh, he's got this option to invest. It would be really good if he could have even more money now and invest in that high return project, right? So what he could do is he could say, all right, well, the interest rate's 10% if I go to the bank. I could borrow a whole bunch of money and invest that and get 50%. Right? And this is often what entrepreneurs do, is that they say, all right, I have a really good idea. I'm going to borrow from a bank and turn that borrowed money into a higher rate of return. Now, depending on the risk, the bank may or may not lend. But in this case, that actually shifts out Marco's feasible set by even more, because now Marco can borrow now, consume some of it, invest some of it, and get on an even higher utility level, right? An even higher indifference curve here at point L, where he's consuming 80 now and 62 in the future. Now, keep in mind that this is both the highest utility, but it also comes with the highest risk, right? If the project falls apart, then he's consumed 80 now, he has to pay back the loan at 10%. If he doesn't get that 50% return, he's going to be consuming a lot less in the future. All right, so we'll stop there for this one. Oh no, let's keep going. Sorry. We're going to keep going. And so the idea here is, remember that the savings decision is really very similar to the borrowing decision. It's just whether you start with more or whether you start with less. And you want to move consumption into the future, in which case you want to save, or you want to move consumption from the future into the present, in which case you want to borrow. But either side, we're going to set the marginal rate of substitution equal to the marginal rate of transformation, which is always a recurring theme in this class, right? We're basically setting those two slopes equal. So investment, let's move my picture up here a little bit, is all about trying to grow the pie, right? Grow the pie. And a person like Julia, who doesn't have any assets now, is not going to have the same opportunities that Marco does, who does have assets now, right? Julia is just looking to borrow in order to consume and is unlikely to find someone willing to lend to her to make a big investment. Whereas Marco, because he already has the endowment, the $100, he might be more able to invest. And that's going to increase both his investment opportunities and therefore his consumption opportunities. So, the way we can sort of think about this is from Marco's point of view. He can store, he can lend, he can invest, or he can borrow and then invest, right? And he's going to have more consumption both now and later, and each of these will lead to higher levels of utility, right? So if we combine the consumption between the two, we can see that those increase from all of those options. I just want to say again that the level of risk increases with all of those options as well, but that's the way entrepreneurial activities go, right? The higher the risk, the higher the reward in general. So this is just a sort of a summary of that table in terms of the graph. Is if he just stores it, he'll consume at point H, that's his lowest utility. If he lends, he can consume at point J, that's the next highest utility. If he invests, he can consume at point K. And if he borrows money and then invests it, or at least invests some of it, then he can consume at point L, and that's his highest opportunity. So it's really important both to think about the opportunities that are open to people depending on where they start, but also the risk involved in trying to increase your feasible set.